There is a certain kind of person who can smile at you while quietly ruining everything you care about. Victoria Sterling was more than just an unfaithful wife. She was a cold and careful planner, pretending to be a kind and healthy lifestyle expert. Behind her perfect image, she was signing papers without permission, taking money from her own son's college fund, and spending thousands of dollars on secret personal changes. She did all this to support a strange and hidden life with a young man, who also happened to be her daughter's new boyfriend. Victoria thought she was smart. She believed her lies could never be caught. But people who lie a lot often make a big, careless mistake. For Victoria, that mistake came on the very night her faithful husband was ready to give her a special gift. Richard Sterling sat alone at the nicest table in Seattle. Next to his water glass was a small velvet box holding a ruby necklace. It was their 40th wedding anniversary, but his wife was not there. Suddenly, his phone buzzed on the white tablecloth. It was Victoria. Richard picked up the phone and held it close. "Darling, I am so sorry," Victoria said quickly, her voice sounding rushed and worried. "A very important client is having a serious problem at the Fairmont Hotel. I must help right now." Richard frowned and spoke softly, so the waiters nearby wouldn't overhear. "Victoria, it's our ruby anniversary. Can't someone else handle this?" "It's very serious for their well-being," she said firmly. She said sorry again for ruining their special night, then ended the call suddenly. But the phone did not hang up right away. In the quiet moment, Richard heard a clear, steady squeak of a bed spring. Soon after, he caught a soft laugh from a younger man through the speaker. Then, the call ended. Richard stayed calm. He didn't make a scene in the quiet restaurant. He just paid the very high bill, picked up the velvet box, and drove back to their clean, empty house in the suburbs. He walked past the dark living room and went straight into Victoria's large study, decorated with a peaceful, natural feel. He needed to lock the expensive ruby necklace in her heavy floor safe. Richard knelt and opened the strong steel door. As it swung open, a folded piece of paper fell out from behind a pile of colorful wellness retreat brochures. It landed softly on the carpet. Richard picked up the paper and smoothed it out on the wooden desk. It was a bank transfer receipt from a small bank branch that Victoria never visited. The paper showed a large transfer of $60,000 into a business account. Richard didn't know the name of the business. He looked again inside the open safe. His jaw tightened. His small electronic security device, a tool needed to approve big bank transfers, was not where he usually left it. Richard was very careful. He knew exactly where he put his things. Someone had moved his security device. He took the receipt and the security device with him and walked down the hall to his locked home office. Richard sat behind his heavy oak desk and turned on his laptop. He avoided the usual family internet, using a very safe, coded connection instead. He logged into their shared bank account to find out what was really going on. His sharp eyes moved quickly over the screen. He checked the $60,000 transfer by looking at the bank's digital signature records. The signature matched his own security device perfectly. Someone had used his device to fake his approval, but the computer's IP address for the transaction gave the truth away. It showed the transfer came from Victoria's private iPad. Richard looked more closely at their joint savings account. He went over the past 6 months of bank statements. The betrayal shocked him. He found many secret, regular withdrawals adding up to $150,000. They were hidden under simple medical billing codes. He followed the routing numbers. The stolen money was not sent to a charity or a medical center. It was wired to a private cosmetic surgery clinic in Oregon called Elysian Aesthetics. Richard leaned back in his chair. His face showed no emotion at all. A cold calm filled him. His wife of 40 years was not at the Fairmont Hotel helping a client. She was faking his signature, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars for secret surgeries, and spending their anniversary night with another man. He printed every document. The printer worked quietly in his dark office, making clear proof of her actions. Richard took his phone and called his private security contact. "Marcus," he said, his voice cool and firm. "I want a full surveillance team on my wife. Start tonight." The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, Richard Sterling sat stiffly behind the big glass desk in his office. The bank papers from the night before were locked safely inside his leather briefcase. He had not slept at all. The heavy oak door opened. Marcus, his experienced private investigator, came inside. Marcus did not say hello. He walked straight to the desk and pushed a thick tan envelope across the smooth glass. "She didn't go to the Fairmont Hotel last night, Richard," Marcus said quietly. "She went to a steakhouse in Bellevue." Richard did not react. He reached out and opened the envelope. Inside were many clear photos taken from a camera. The shiny pictures showed his wife, Victoria, sitting in a dark corner booth. She was sitting close with a much younger man. Richard looked carefully at the young man's face. His hair was slicked back. He wore gold-rimmed glasses and a sharp, well-fitted suit. He looked rich, smart, and completely focused on Victoria. Suddenly, Richard stopped breathing for a moment. He looked hard at the man's face in the photo. A cold, bad feeling came over him. He quickly reached into his jacket and pulled out his leather wallet. With shaking hands, he took out a small printed photo. It was a picture his oldest daughter, Eleanor, had given him last week. Richard placed the investigator's photo and Eleanor's picture side by side on the glass desk. In Eleanor's photo, she was smiling happily next to her new boyfriend, Liam. Liam had messy curly hair, no glasses, and was wearing a worn leather jacket. He looked like a normal, hard-working man. The hair and clothes were very different. But Richard was a careful man who noticed every little thing. He looked closer. The shape of the face was clear. The strong jawline and dark, sharp eyes were exactly the same. It was the same man. Richard tapped his finger on the glass desk. The sound filled the quiet office. "Marcus," Richard said firmly, his voice full of anger, "tell me exactly who this man is." Marcus reached into his coat and gave him a printed background check. "His real name is Caleb Hayes. He is 26 years old. He is not working right now and has a lot of debt." Richard looked at the file. This was more than just a cheating wife or stolen money. This man had gotten very close to his family. He was involved with Victoria and also seeing Richard's daughter at the same time. That evening, Richard went back to his neat house in the quiet suburbs. He found Victoria sitting calmly in the bright living room. She was wearing a nice silk robe and slowly drinking a cup of herbal tea. When Richard came in, Victoria smiled at him gently. It was the smile of someone who thought she had fooled everyone. "I'm sorry about last night, dear," Victoria said softly. "The help at the hotel was tiring, but it worked well. My client is feeling better now." Richard did not get angry or shout. He passed by her to the wooden bar and calmly poured himself a glass of scotch. "I'm happy you were there for them, Victoria," Richard said, his voice calm and steady. Victoria nodded, not noticing his cold mood. She started talking a lot about her next wellness seminar. She spoke smoothly about honesty, purity, and inner healing. Richard stood quietly with his drink, watching her face closely. As she spoke, he saw something he had not noticed before. He saw the careful and unusual tightness around her jawline. It was clear she had secretly used cosmetic surgery, paid for with the money she had taken from him. He took a slow sip of his scotch. He knew it was not yet the time to confront her. The situation was too risky for his daughter, Eleanor. The plan had to be just right, and he needed Victoria to leave the house to keep his family safe. "You seem stressed," Richard said quietly, putting down his glass. "You do so much for everyone. You should take a break and go to our mountain cabin this weekend. Just to relax." Victoria's eyes brightened with a happy surprise. "That sounds great, Richard." She took another sip of her tea, not knowing that her husband had already begun a plan that would change everything. While Richard Sterling quietly worked out a way to protect his family from his wife's betrayal, the real threat inside his home was already making his next move. The very next afternoon, Caleb Hayes' hidden life became clearer. Caleb sat alone at a small table in a crowded coffee shop downtown, looking closely at a laptop screen. He looked just like the photo Richard found the night before. His hair was messy in careless curls. He wore an old, brown leather jacket over a simple t-shirt. To most people, especially Richard's daughter, he was just Liam, a calm, hard-working, but struggling young man. Eleanor rushed into the coffee shop, tired but smiling. She dropped her heavy leather bag on a chair and leaned down to greet him warmly. "Hey, Liam. Sorry I'm late," Eleanor said, trying to catch her breath. "My meeting ran longer than I thought." Caleb smiled softly. His voice was steady and kind. made to help her feel safe. Don't be sorry for working hard. That's the part of you I really admire. Eleanor's face brightened. She reached into her purse and took out a big white envelope. My parents want you to come for dinner this Sunday. It's time they finally meet you. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, pretending to look excited but a bit nervous. I would be honored, Elle. I just want to make a good impression on your father. He excused himself to the restroom. Once the heavy wooden door was locked, his warm smile disappeared. His face grew cold and serious. He took out a cheap phone, his special Liam phone. He quickly checked his blocked contacts to make sure Eleanor couldn't find his real social media profiles. Then, he sent a quick message to his angry landlord. He promised to pay his overdue rent by tomorrow morning. He owed a lot of money and needed cash fast. 10 minutes later, Caleb kissed Eleanor goodbye on the bright sidewalk. He got into his old car and drove to a small, quiet gas station on the edge of town. He parked behind the building, grabbed a heavy gym bag from the trunk, and went into the dirty public bathroom. It was time to change who he was. Caleb leaned over the sink and washed the styling gel out of his hair with force. He dried it with paper towels and then slicked his black hair back neatly with expensive pomade. He put on a pair of gold glasses, instantly looking older and more polished. Next, he took off his cheap leather jacket and jeans. He changed into a sharp, very expensive Tom Ford suit. It was a gift from Victoria, bought with money she took without permission from Richard. He reached into his bag again and pulled out his other burner phone, his Caleb phone. He called Victoria's private number. Victoria, my muse, Caleb said quietly, making his voice smooth and a bit romantic.
Victoria,
I need to see you tonight.
my muse.
I can't focus on my
I need
code.
to see you tonight.
I can't stop thinking about you. That evening, Caleb arrived at a fancy apartment downtown. It was a private, expensive place that Victoria rented under a secret business name for her client wellness sessions. Victoria opened the door wearing a silk outfit. She smiled happily and looked at him with full trust. Then she pulled him inside. An hour later, Caleb lay on the big, soft bed. He gently ran his fingers over Victoria's arm, waiting for the right moment to say what he wanted. My software startup needs a small server upgrade, Caleb said, sounding tired and worried. The costs are really slowing me down. Victoria kissed his chest kindly. Don't worry your brilliant mind, darling. I will send you $10,000 tomorrow. Caleb shook his head, pretending to be unsure. No, I can't take your money, Victoria. You already do so much for me. Victoria held his hand tightly. She didn't know that the money she promised belonged to her husband. You are my source of happiness, Caleb. Think of this as an investment for our future. Caleb smiled softly in the low light. He had secured his rent money, and he had an invitation to the Sterling family home. He thought he was in control, but he did not know Richard Sterling was already watching him closely. Sunday dinner would bring a serious meeting. Richard Sterling knew time was running out. He had just found out that Caleb, the young scammer, planned to come to their family dinner on Sunday. Richard could no longer wait to act. He could no longer keep his oldest daughter, Eleanor, away from the truth. The serious problem had grown too big, and Richard had to act fast. He picked up the private phone in his office and called his daughter's number. Cancel your afternoon meetings, he said, his voice heavy and serious. Come to my office at Sterling Innovations, now. 20 minutes later, Eleanor arrived, setting her heavy briefcase down by the door. The moment she walked in, she saw the worried look on her father's face. She also noticed he walked past her to lock the heavy oak door, making sure no one could come in. Richard pointed to the chair across from his desk. Sit down, Eleanor, he said quietly. What I'm about to show you will be hard to hear. Without a word, he slid 2 printed photos across the shiny glass desk. Eleanor stared at the pictures, her brow creasing in confusion. On the left was a photo from surveillance showing her mother, Victoria, sharing a close moment with a young man in a dark restaurant booth. On the right was a casual photo Eleanor had given her father just last week, herself smiling beside her boyfriend, Liam. Eleanor looked up, her voice shaking a little. Dad, why do you have pictures of Liam with Mom? Richard stayed silent. He pushed over a set of papers, a detailed background check, and a timeline made by a private investigator. Eleanor's hands trembled as she read the documents. The timeline showed Caleb's exact movements. It made clear how he was going back and forth between Eleanor's life and her mother's apartment. The painful truth hit her hard. She dropped the papers and covered her face with her hands. A sharp, quiet cry of hurt came from her chest. It was the sound of a daughter finding out that her own mother was involved with the man she loved. Richard walked around the glass desk. He put a firm hand on his daughter's shaking shoulder, giving quiet support as her world fell apart. Eleanor cried silently for 2 minutes. Then, she stood up quickly. She went straight to Richard's private bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. When she came back, her eyes were red, but her face showed no more sadness or weakness. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger. Eleanor looked directly into Richard's eyes. "She brought a problem into my life," Eleanor said, her voice sharp like ice. "No matter what, they are both finished for me." Richard nodded slowly. "We will take them down, step by step, together." Now that they were united, Richard moved the plan forward. He pulled out the financial papers he had printed before. He wanted Eleanor to see just how deep her mother's betrayal was. "Your mother didn't just take money from our shared savings," Richard said, sliding the bank papers forward. "She also forged my signature and took $60,000 from your younger brother Julian's college fund." Eleanor's jaw tightened so much, it made a quiet crack in the still room. "She stole from Julian's future for something selfish?" she asked, her voice full of disgust. "Just to keep a boy she was seeing interested?" "Yes," Richard said. Then he shared his plan. He wanted a clear and strong confrontation where neither Victoria nor Caleb could avoid the truth. He reminded Eleanor that Victoria was going to their quiet mountain cabin this weekend for a fake wellness trip. Eleanor's eyes grew sharp and focused. A new problem had come up, and she knew just how to use it. "Liam, Caleb asked his parents from Idaho to come to Seattle this weekend to meet me," Eleanor said, her mind moving fast. "They arrive tomorrow evening." Richard leaned forward, clearly interested. "Where will they stay?" "At the downtown Marriott," Eleanor answered. "I'm supposed to pick them up for dinner." Eleanor picked up her phone from the desk, holding it tightly. "I'm not taking them to dinner. I'll bring them straight to the mountain cabin. Let his strict family see the real him." The next morning, the large Sterling mansion was very quiet. Richard and Victoria sat at the long dining table, having what seemed like a normal breakfast. To anyone watching, they looked like a perfect couple. But Richard knew better. He was sitting across from someone who wasn't honest. Victoria gently wiped her mouth with a white napkin. She smiled, her eyes full of practiced lies. "Richard, I took your good advice," Victoria said smoothly. "I'm going to the Cascade Mountain cabin for 2 days to think and clear my mind." Richard didn't look up from his newspaper. He spoke in a calm, even tone, hiding the anger he felt inside. "Take the all-wheel drive SUV. The mountain roads are slippery this time of year." Victoria stood and walked over to him. She leaned down to kiss his cheek. Her voice was fake and practiced. "Thank you for understanding, darling." Richard stayed still, feeling a cold wave of disgust at her touch. He waited quietly until the sound of her car engine disappeared down the long driveway. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus, his private investigator. "Marcus," Richard said firmly, "did you manage to put the GPS tracker on Caleb's car while it was parked at the apartment?" "Yes," Marcus answered. "The magnetic tracker is working, but Richard, something big just happened. Caleb is packing a bag. He's heading toward the North Highway now." Richard slowly lowered the phone. A sudden, unsettling feeling came over him. This changed everything. Richard and Eleanor had thought Caleb was careful and smart, someone who managed 2 fake lives with great care. But this new news showed they were wrong. Caleb was not careful. He was very bold and careless. Caleb had invited his strict parents all the way from Idaho to Seattle for the weekend to meet Eleanor. But instead of spending time with them, he was leaving his family alone in a hotel room. He was leaving Eleanor to take care of his parents by herself, while he went away to meet Eleanor's mother in the mountains. This changed everything. Caleb was someone who believed he could do anything without getting caught. His boldness had blinded him and had now given Richard the perfect chance to stop him. An hour later, Richard went to his lawyer's office in a tall building downtown. He walked in and dropped a stack of papers on the big glass table. The papers included proof of forged signatures and photos from the investigator. "Prepare a post-nuptial agreement and a divorce paper," Richard said, his voice strong and sure. "0 of the shared property. No money to support her after the split. She gets nothing but the clothes she's wearing." The experienced lawyer looked over the papers about the stolen money. He frowned, seeing the clear proof. "Richard, be careful. If she signs this because the police are threatening her, she might say later it's unfair. A judge could cancel everything." Richard shook his head. He had already thought it all through. "Then make it a civil repayment deal," he said. The lawyer looked surprised by the new plan. "She gives up all her shared property to pay back Julian's stolen college fund and fix the damage," Richard said coldly. "In return, the trust promises not to use the law against her. It's just paying back what was taken. She won't have any reason to fight it." The lawyer nodded slowly. He understood the smart, strong, legal move. "That works. It can't be changed." Richard waited quietly in the calm office while the papers were carefully prepared. Finally, they were printed and placed in a heavy black leather folder. The tool was ready. Meanwhile, across town, Eleanor sat inside her parked luxury SUV in front of the downtown Marriott Hotel. She looked in the rearview mirror and tried to smile warmly. It took all her strength to hide the anger inside. Her phone suddenly buzzed. A message from Liam appeared. "Can't wait for you to meet my parents on Sunday. Miss you." Eleanor stared at the glowing screen. The bold lie made her feel sick. He was spending time with her mother but pretending to care for her while ignoring his own family. Eleanor typed back with her usual cold smile. "They will be surprised by what I have planned. See you soon." She quickly deleted the message, feeling sick after the digital contact. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor stepped out of her car and walked into the busy hotel lobby. She looked around and saw an older couple sitting stiffly by the water fountain. They seemed traditional and serious, not like most people in the city. Eleanor walked straight up to them and held out her hand calmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes?" she asked with a clear, polite voice. "I'm Eleanor. Welcome to Seattle." The plan was ready. Everything was moving toward the mountain cabin, and Caleb and Victoria had no idea what was coming. Eleanor kindly helped Caleb's parents out of the noisy lobby and into the back seat of her fancy SUV. As she shut their doors, a heavy feeling grew deep inside her. This was the hardest part of her painful plan. Before this moment, her anger was only toward her dishonest mother and her cheating boyfriend. But now, looking at the older couple in her mirror, she felt the truth. These were good, kind people. They had come all this way just to see their son, and now Eleanor was bringing them toward a deep sadness. The price of her revenge suddenly felt very real and personal. Eleanor joined the darkening highway and drove toward the outline of the tall Cascade Mountains, following the speed limit. In the back, Caleb's father sat with his arms crossed. He was a serious man, a retired police chief who had spent his life studying people and spotting lies. He did not seem very at ease. "Caleb told us we were having a formal dinner on Sunday," said the older man, his voice low and full of questions. "Why the sudden change of plans, Eleanor?" Eleanor forced a bright smile as she looked into the rearview mirror. Her voice stayed calm and steady. "My father wanted to do something very special. He planned a surprise weekend at our private mountain cabin." Caleb's mother folded her hands with warmth, her eyes shining with true thanks. "Oh, how lovely. Caleb always speaks so well of your family. He told us how much you care for each other." Eleanor held the steering wheel tightly. Her fingers gripped it so hard her knuckles went white. A sharp feeling pressed on her heart. She knew Caleb had lied to his parents just like he had lied to her. He had used this kind woman's pride in her son against her. "He is full of surprises, Mrs. Hayes," Eleanor said quietly. Her words had a secret meaning that only she understood. She looked out at the dark road, facing the hard truth. It was painful to hurt these kind parents, but letting Caleb keep hurting innocent women would be worse. Things could not go back to the way they were before. An hour later, the smooth highway changed into a winding, narrow mountain road. The air grew cold and thin. Eleanor stopped at a quiet, flickering gas station 10 miles from the cabin. In the dark shadows of the lot was Richard's heavy black car. Eleanor parked her SUV next to her father's vehicle. Richard stepped out into the cold night. His face was hard like stone. He walked over and shook Caleb's parents' hands firmly, but without a smile. He did not try to make small talk. Richard looked the retired police chief straight in the eye. "Thank you for coming," Richard said, his voice cold and serious. "Tonight will make things clear for both our families." The older man nodded slowly. As a former police officer, he felt something was wrong right away. Richard's harsh tone and the cold, empty meeting place did not feel like a happy family gathering. It felt like a trap. Richard turned and told Eleanor to follow him carefully for the rest of the drive up the mountain. The danger was coming closer. 10 miles away, inside the old wooden cabin, the mood was very different. It looked calm and even a bit careless. A big fire burned loudly in the stone fireplace, warming the room and making long shadows on the walls. Caleb had changed back into his usual polite and confident self. He wore fancy glasses and a neat open shirt. He was standing by the kitchen island, calmly pouring 2 glasses of expensive red wine that Richard had bought years ago. Victoria did not know what was about to happen. She was resting on the large leather sofa, wearing a light silk robe. "This is exactly what I needed, Caleb," she said happily with her eyes closed. "Complete peace and quiet." Caleb walked over and gave her the glass of wine. He leaned down and gave her a gentle kiss on the neck, acting like a caring companion. "Just you and me, Victoria," he said quietly. "No phone signal, no interruptions." Victoria smiled and ran her hands through his hair. They both felt safe and comfortable. They believed they had built a strong shield around themselves with their careful plans. Outside, in the cold and dark, the trap was finally ready. The sound of gravel crunching under the tires of 2 cars coming closer went unnoticed. The loud wind in the mountains covered the noise perfectly. If you are curious to see what happens next, please like this video and subscribe to Cheating Heart Stories. We want to hear what you think about the characters. Do you believe Richard and Eleanor are right to try to stop Victoria and Caleb, or are they going too far? Write a comment below to join the talk and share your ideas. When someone breaks our trust, it can hurt us deeply. But stories like this remind us that the truth will come out in the end. Facing lies takes a lot of bravery. It also gives a chance to rebuild life based on real honesty. Always protect your feelings and limits. Remember, even after hard times, you have the power to make a better and true future. The dark, winding mountain road finally became flat as the 2 cars neared the Sterling family cabin. Richard and Eleanor both reached to turn off their headlights at the same time. The cars went completely dark. They moved forward quietly, the tires softly crunching on the long dirt driveway. Richard guided his small car behind the big wooden garage, parking where no one inside the cabin could see him. Eleanor pulled her SUV right next to his. The trap was ready. Richard stepped out into the cold mountain air. He took a black leather folder from the seat beside him. Inside were strong papers that showed clear proof about money and a legal agreement. He held it tight under his arm like it was something powerful. Eleanor got out of her SUV and opened the back doors for Caleb's parents. The older couple stepped onto the cold, hard ground and immediately began to shiver. Caleb's father, a retired police chief, looked around the dark property. His old police instincts kicked in. His face tightened, showing he was very suspicious. This was not a usual family visit. There were no lights on the porch, no music playing, and no smell of food. He glanced at Richard's serious face and understood that they were in a risky situation. Richard said nothing to explain or calm them. He just turned and quietly led the group toward the cabin. They walked carefully up the wooden steps to a large porch that went all around the cabin. The wind blew through the tall pine trees, covering the sound of their steps. When they reached the heavy front door, Richard stopped. He turned to face them and raised one finger to his lips, asking for quiet. Eleanor held her breath. The guilt she had felt before about bringing Caleb's parents here was now replaced by a sharp, nervous energy. Everything they had done had led to this moment. There was no going back now. Richard reached into his thick wool coat, and took out a large brass key. He held it tightly and slowly pushed it into the door's lock. He turned it, and the lock made a loud click that rang out on the porch. Inside the cabin, in a warm room lit by firelight, Caleb suddenly stopped moving. He lifted his head from Victoria's shoulder, confused. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, looking toward the door. Victoria did not open her eyes. She smiled softly, relaxed in her thin silk robe. She gently pulled him close to her chest. "It's just the wind moving the wood, dear," she said quietly. "Don't worry about it." Outside, in the cold and dark, Richard held the cold iron door handle. He looked back at Eleanor. There was no more hiding, no more looking around, no more waiting. Eleanor met her father's eyes and gave him a firm nod. Richard did not turn the handle or open the door quietly. Instead, he lifted his boot and kicked the thick wooden door open with force. Crash! The heavy door hit the wall loudly like an explosion. The group stepped aggressively into the dark, shadowy entrance of the cabin. Before Caleb or Victoria could react to the loud noise, Richard slammed his hand on the wall switch. The big living room filled instantly with bright, harsh light. The dark, quiet mood disappeared at once. Victoria screamed softly with fear. She raised her hands to cover her eyes from the sudden bright light, her heart beating fast. Caleb moved back quickly, full of panic. His calm and proud look broke. He slipped off the edge of the leather sofa and fell hard onto the thick rug. His dress shirt opened wide, his chest shone in the bright light. Time seemed to stop. The room was filled with a heavy silence, full of shock. Caleb's parents stood frozen in the doorway, staring in disbelief at their son on the floor with the older woman nearby. The secret was out. The lies were revealed. Their world had changed forever. Richard stood right in the middle of the doorway, blocking their only way out. His face was cold and hard, showing no emotion. He held a thick black folder tightly in his hand, as if ready to take action. The strong ceiling lights felt harsh in the cold mountain cabin. Victoria quickly got up. Her hands shook as she pulled her thin silk robe tightly around her to cover herself. She stared at her husband, standing like a solid stone figure. Panic took over her mind. Feeling trapped, she went back to the lies she had used before. "Richard," Victoria said, her voice shaky and high. "What are you doing here? Please let me explain. This was a private wellness session. I was forced." Before she could finish, Eleanor stepped out from behind Richard. Victoria stopped and looked on in silent shock. Seeing her husband was bad enough, but seeing her eldest daughter made her face go pale. Eleanor's eyes were fixed on her mother with strong anger. After all the crying in her father's office earlier that week, Eleanor had no sadness left. Her voice was calm, but sharp. "What exactly are you going to explain, Mom?" Eleanor asked, her words cutting through the thick, tense air. "Do you even know who the man fixing his shirt over there is?" Victoria blinked fast. She looked completely lost, her mouth moving without sound. Slowly, she turned her head from her angry daughter to the young man sitting on the bearskin rug, clearly nervous. Eleanor pointed at Caleb with a straight, accusing finger. "He is Liam," Eleanor said, sharing the first shocking truth of the night. "He is the caring boyfriend I planned to bring home to meet my parents this Sunday." The false image fell apart right away. Victoria looked down at Caleb. The terrible, upsetting truth hit her hard. The young, stylish person she had been spending so much money on was actually hurting her own daughter. She showed clear disgust and moved away from him like he was dangerous. But Caleb's trouble was far from over. Still on his hands and knees, Caleb finally looked beyond Richard and Eleanor. His eyes met the older, serious couple standing quietly in the doorway. His breath caught. He realized for the first time that his own parents were there, watching him in shame. In a panic, wanting to avoid his father's angry look, Caleb lost control. He went back to his only way to cope. He tried to put on his mask again. He quickly took off his fancy gold-rimmed glasses and threw them aside. He hurriedly ran his hands through his slicked-back hair, trying to make it messy, like the way he looked with Eleanor. He wanted to be Liam again. He wanted to be the innocent son his parents knew, but messing up his hair and taking off the glasses only made him look weak and lost. It ruined the fake image he had built as Caleb. When he spoke, his deep, calm voice was gone. He sounded nervous and rough, just like Liam. "Dad, Mom, Elle," Caleb said. his voice shaking as he raised his hands a little. "Please! It's not what it looks like, I promise." The lie felt very strange in the quiet room. Victoria couldn't take the shame anymore. Her legs gave way, and she fell down hard on the cold wooden floor. She covered her face with her hands and cried quietly. In the doorway, Caleb's father had seen enough. The old police chief's face turned bright red with anger. Without asking, he pushed past Richard and Eleanor and walked straight into the room. Caleb backed away until his back hit the cold stone fireplace. He was trapped. His father stopped just a little away from him. When he spoke, his low voice filled the room with fear. "You used a fake name to trick this young woman," he said with disgust. "And you pretended to be someone else to be close to her mother." Caleb raised his hands, and tears rolled down his face. "Dad, please listen to me." But he couldn't finish. His father gave him a hard slap that echoed through the cabin. Caleb spun around and fell hard onto the floor. Blood trickled from his lip as he held his face in pain. The older man stood over him, full of anger. "You have done wrong," he shouted, pointing at him. "You have brought shame to our family. Leave now. You are no longer part of us." Near the open door, Caleb's mother began crying loudly. She could not look at the son she had raised anymore. Slowly and with great pain, she turned her back on her hurt son and chose to stand with those he had wronged. Their relationships were broken beyond repair. All the secrets now lay open and clear. Richard held the black folder tighter in his hand. The angry fight was over, but the cold and careful punishment was just beginning. Caleb's parents did not wait for any excuse or sorry words. His father turned and walked quickly out the open front door into the cold night. His mother followed right behind him, still crying loudly. They walked down the dark road without looking back, going to call a taxi and leaving their son alone, as if forever. Caleb slowly crawled toward the door, holding his injured face. He knew he was completely exposed and trapped by the man he had taken from. Scared, Caleb did not try to say anything more. He got up quickly, pushed past Richard's strong shoulder, and ran out into the cold night air. He left behind his bag, his expensive jacket, and his glasses. He disappeared into the darkness with nothing. Inside the bright and crowded cabin, Victoria sat on the floor. She stopped crying and slowly looked up. Only her husband and daughter were left in the room. The truth of what had happened hit her hard. Her secret relationship was over. Her daughter knew everything. She felt trapped. Victoria moved toward Richard, her hands shaking as she grabbed the bottom of his pants. "Richard, please," she said, her voice full of fear and need. "Close the doors. We can make this calm and quiet. Please don't ruin my good name as a wellness expert. I'll do whatever you want." "We can fix this," Richard said, but he did not look at her kindly. He pulled his leg away quickly from her tight grasp, shaking his head with clear dislike. Eleanor stepped forward then. She reached inside her warm, thick coat and took out her smartphone. The bright screen lit up the quiet, tense room. "It's too late to stay quiet, Mom," Eleanor said, her voice cold and clear. She tapped the phone and held it close so Victoria could see the screen well. "I'm not dumb enough to post this for everyone to see and let you sue me for lies," Eleanor said calmly. Victoria stared at the phone, eyes wide with shock. The screen showed a video of the whole scene they had just lived through. Caleb was on the floor, Victoria was shouting in her robe, and Caleb's father was giving a harsh slap. The video was already ready to send on a private WhatsApp list. "The cabin's fast Wi-Fi worked great," Eleanor added. "I recorded everything from the moment Dad kicked the door open." Before Victoria could even say stop, Eleanor pressed the send key. "That video just went out to your board of directors, your important clients, and both sides of our family," Eleanor said. Victoria gasped, holding her chest in shock. At that moment, she knew everything was lost. Her high social place, her strong career, and her carefully built reputation were all ruined in just a few seconds. There was no way to fix it now. The harm was done. But the consequences were not finished. Richard stepped forward and opened a heavy black folder he had been carrying. He dropped a thick stack of papers onto the glass coffee table right in front of Victoria. "You faked my electronic signature. Richard said, his voice sharp and cold. "You took $60,000 from Julian's trust fund to pay for secret plastic surgery? I have all the digital records and bank transfer papers right here." Victoria stared at the bank statement spread out on the glass table. Her whole body shook so hard her teeth were chattering. She knew Richard had found out everything. Richard pointed firmly at the signature line at the bottom of the thick legal paper. "Sign this civil settlement," he ordered. "You give up all marital property to pay back the trust and cover the damages. You leave with nothing." Victoria looked up at him, her eyes full of hope for kindness. Richard didn't soften. He dropped a fancy silver pen onto the papers. "Sign this, and the family trust will not press criminal charges," he said calmly. "If you refuse, I will give the proof to the Seattle police tomorrow for theft and fraud." Victoria felt completely crushed. She felt trapped by the legal plan Richard had made with no way out. She had no power left, no good name left, no one to help her. Her hands trembled badly as she picked up the silver pen. She bent her head and signed her name at the bottom. While Richard and Eleanor carried out their cold, careful plan in the chilly mountain cabin, a very different event was happening back in the city. In a small college apartment in Seattle, Julian Sterling sat at his tiny desk. He was 20 years old, wearing sweatpants and a large hoodie, deeply focused on studying for a big midterm exam. He had no idea about the terrible things happening far away. Suddenly, Julian's phone buzzed loudly on the wooden desk. Then it buzzed again and again. He frowned and picked it up. His screen was filled with many quick messages. Aunts, uncles, and older cousins were all writing to him in a hurry. His phone was buzzing so fast he could barely read the texts. "Julian, are you okay? Have you seen the video?" "I'm so sorry, Julian." His heart started to beat faster. He quickly opened the family group chat. At the bottom of the messages, there was a video sent from Eleanor's phone number. Julian pressed play. He saw a video showing his mother in a very upsetting moment. The camera showed Richard opening the door forcefully. He saw his mother, upset and angry, caught with a man he didn't know. He heard his sister's cold voice talking about the betrayal. Julian sat still in his chair. His face went pale as he watched this terrible scene. But after the shock, a stronger feeling took over. Julian's face grew hot with strong, uncontrollable anger. He did not feel sad. He felt completely exposed. Eleanor had not only sent the video to close family, she had shared his mother's worst moment with many others in their family, and even some important people in Victoria's business world. Everyone Julian knew was watching this now. His family's private problem was now something many people saw. He felt deep shame and anger. He grabbed his car keys from the kitchen counter and ran out of his apartment so fast that he left the front door open. Julian drove quickly through the dark city streets. His thoughts were full of his mother's actions and his father's harsh and public response. He held the steering wheel tightly, his hands white with anger. He was furious that Richard and Eleanor had done something that hurt everyone's good name. An hour later, Julian's car suddenly turned sharply into the long driveway of the neat Sterling house. He jumped out just as Richard and Eleanor arrived in their cars. They had just finished a quiet, long drive back from the mountain cabin. Julian quickly walked up the front steps, his face full of anger. He didn't wait for a hello. He started yelling at them right away. "Why did you do it this way?" Julian shouted, his voice loud in the quiet neighborhood. "Why did you tell everyone?" Eleanor stepped forward quickly, raising her hands to calm him down. "Julian, please. She took your tuition money. She faked Dad's signature. She betrayed all of us. We had to stop her fast." Julian pushed past his sister and walked into the large entrance hall. "Now my friends know," he shouted, his voice shaking with pain. "The business partners know. Everyone in our family knows. Everyone will see me as a poor kid with a broken family." Richard came into the hall. He spoke slowly and clearly, like a leader trying to control the moment, just as he had controlled Victoria before. "Julian, calm down now. This was a careful plan. We needed to remove her fully, without any chance for problems or a long legal fight." Julian turned and looked at his father in shock. The cold, emotionless way Richard talked about breaking their family apart scared him. Julian spoke back with strong feelings. "My life and my honor are ruined. You both only cared about getting back at her. You didn't care about me, Julian shouted as he turned sharply and stormed out through the heavy front door, slamming it hard behind him. The loud noise echoed through the empty mansion. Richard and Eleanor stood silently in the entrance hall, suddenly feeling the full weight of what had just happened. Far away across town, the video caused another big uproar. At Victoria's rich, fancy parents' house, angry voices filled the tall, expensive rooms. Victoria's father, a proud and very traditional man who cared deeply about his family's name, paced the floor in a furious state. In anger, he threw a heavy vase against the wall, breaking it into many pieces. "She has ruined our family's good name," he shouted, pointing at his wife. Victoria's mother cried hard, holding her chest while sitting on the fancy sofa. "She was going through a hard time. Why are you being so harsh with your own daughter?" she asked. The father stopped pacing and pointed at his wife with a shaking, angry finger. "Your kindness and excuses made this happen. I won't accept it anymore." Then he turned and went into the master bedroom. He grabbed a big leather suitcase from the closet's top shelf and started quickly packing his clothes. 10 minutes later, he walked out into the cold night. Before leaving, he said loudly that he planned to start a legal separation. Victoria's actions had not only broken her own marriage, but also deeply divided the whole family. The damage was clear, and it looked like nothing would be the same again. While the Sterling family tried to deal with the heavy sadness left behind in their home, the worst damage had fallen exactly where it should. 3 hard months had passed since the fight at the mountain cabin. The winter snow had melted away into the cold, steady rain of Seattle. The dark secrets were gone, but the effects stayed for good. Caleb Hayes sat alone in a cheap, moldy motel room far outside the city. The small room smelled of damp carpet and old smoke. He sat at a shaky wooden desk, staring sadly at his glowing laptop screen. Caleb looked very different from the confident man he was 3 months ago. He was thin and tired. His face had scruffy growth and dark bags hung under his eyes. The polished, proud Caleb was gone. The strong, easygoing Liam was gone, too. Only a sad and broken man stayed. His hands shook as he checked his email again. A new message appeared at the top of the list. His heart jumped with a small hope, but that hope died as soon as he read the subject line. Application status: rejected. It was a cold, automatic rejection from a medium tech company in downtown Seattle. It was his 30th refusal this month. He did not understand why no one would even give him a phone interview. Caleb was a skilled software worker, but every chance in the city was closed to him. What he did not know was that someone was quietly looking for him. Since the night at the cabin, Eleanor had been using her wide business connections to watch him. Every time Caleb tried for a new job, Eleanor quietly warned the hiring managers. She carefully sent his full background report, his long list of debts, and a private link to an embarrassing video from the mountain cabin. Eleanor had made sure no one wanted to work with him anymore. Caleb didn't know that all these problems were slowly pulling him down, stopping him from moving forward. Suddenly, a loud knock hit his thin motel door. "Hayes!" the heavy-set motel manager shouted from the hallway. His deep voice was hard to hear over the heavy rain outside. "Your rent was due 3 days ago. Pack your things and leave now, or I'll call the police." Caleb's heart raced. He had no money left. His bank accounts were empty. His credit cards were maxed out, and even his family had turned their backs on him. He had no one to ask for help. He quickly stuffed the few dirty clothes he had into a worn-out bag. In the cracked mirror above the sink, he caught a glimpse of his tired, worn face. He looked like he had lost everything. Closing the bag, he lowered his head and stepped out of the cramped room. Caleb walked straight into the cold Seattle rain. His pockets were empty, and he didn't know where to go. Feeling hopeless but needing to act, Caleb made a bold choice. There was only one person in the city with enough money and power to help stop his slow downfall. He had to find Richard Sterling. 2 hours later, the sky was completely dark. Caleb stood shivering under the shadows near the underground parking lot of Sterling Innovations. The cold rain soaked through his thin jacket, making him shiver more. He stayed behind a thick concrete pillar, watching the security gate open and close automatically. At last, Richard's big, fancy car stopped at the entrance. The driver rolled down the dark window to show a security badge. It was Richard. Before the gate could open, Caleb suddenly jumped out from behind a concrete pillar. He quickly put his hands on the hood of the car, trying to stop it from moving. Two security guards ran out of the nearby booth. They grabbed Caleb by his arms and gently but firmly moved him away from the car. They pressed him against the cold concrete wall. Richard did not react. He didn't yell or move. He put his car in park and slowly rolled down his window. He looked at Caleb, who was wet and shaking in the rain. Richard's face was hard and closed. He looked at Caleb with total coldness. Caleb started begging. Tears mixed with the rain as they ran down his face. "Mr. Sterling, please." Caleb's voice was full of worry. "I have nothing. I can't find a job anywhere in this city. I know Eleanor is behind this. Please, just stop her. I will do anything. I can leave the state for good. Just please let me live." Richard did not move or show any kindness to the man who had come into his home and caused trouble for his daughter. He had waited 3 months for this moment. He had planned an end that could not be changed. "You thought you were smart, Caleb," Richard said. His voice was calm but firm, matching the sound of the rain. "You thought you could trick 2 rich women. You actually thought you meant something to her." Richard slowly reached into his car's center console. He didn't take out his wallet, money, or anything dangerous. Instead, he pulled out a single folded piece of paper. Without giving it to Caleb, Richard handed it through the car window to the security guard holding Caleb's arm. He nodded once. "Press that right into his chest." The guard pushed the paper hard into Caleb's wet shirt. Caleb grabbed it with fingers that shook and froze. "Read what she really thought of you," Richard said softly, almost like a threat. He pushed a silver button to raise his car window. Then, he put the car in gear and drove slowly through the open gate, leaving Caleb standing against the wall in the heavy rain. The guards quickly let Caleb go and warned him firmly to stay off the private grounds. Caleb didn't listen. His hands shook as he unfolded the wet paper. It was an old printout of a text message conversation. Richard had copied it from Victoria's secure iPad during his search of her files months ago. It showed a private chat between Victoria and her best friend, talking about Caleb long before the argument at the cabin. Caleb's eyes grew wide as he read the harsh, clear words on the page. "He's just someone to use," Victoria had said in a message. "I give him some money, and he does whatever I want, like a loyal dog. It's sad." Caleb stared at the paper as the rain soaked it, making the words blur. The painful truth hit him all at once. This was the last harsh reality he needed to face. Caleb had never been in control. He was not a clever or charming trickster. He was just an easy toy for a rich, bored woman. He had ruined his relationship with his parents. He had lost his apartment. He had destroyed his whole future. And he had done all this for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a pet. Caleb dropped the wet paper onto the cold ground. He fell down on his knees in the cold rain. He felt completely broken, all alone, with nothing left. His destruction was finished. Richard had won the fight. But as Richard drove his quiet car back toward the suburbs, he knew the hardest part was still ahead. Caleb was lost, but the Sterling family was still hurting. Richard had to go home and try to help his son. The storm outside began to clear, but inside Richard's car, a heavy silence stayed. He drove slowly on the dark, wet streets of Seattle, heading back home. His large hands held the steering wheel tight. He had just finished his plan to stop Caleb Hayes, a young man who had hurt his family. Caleb was now broken, left cold and alone in the rain. Richard had won the fight. His plan was perfect. But when Richard looked at the empty seat next to him, sadness filled his heart. He knew that stopping the people who hurt them was only half the problem. The easy part was getting justice. The hard part was fixing the family members who had been hurt. Caleb and Victoria were gone, but the Sterling family was still suffering. Richard took his phone from his coat and called his daughter. "Eleanor," Richard said quietly when she answered, "it's time to go see your brother." That same evening, Richard and Eleanor drove to Julian's small college apartment. They climbed the narrow, dark stairs. For the first time in his life, Richard felt really nervous. He was usually in control, used to giving orders and being respected. But standing outside his son's thin wooden door, He felt unsteady. Richard raised his hand and knocked gently. After a long pause, the door slowly opened. Julian was there. He looked very different from the angry young man he had been 3 months ago when the trouble began. The strong anger was gone from his eyes, replaced by tired calm. He seemed worn out, wearing a faded gray t-shirt and loose sweatpants. Julian looked at his father, then his sister. He did not shout. He just stepped aside to let them in. Richard entered the small, messy living room and sat down heavily on the old, worn couch. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked up at his son. In this quiet room, the cold businessman was not there. Only a sad father stayed. "Julian, we were wrong," Richard said, his voice full of real regret. "I was wrong. I treated this family problem like a harsh business fight. My anger took over. I focused so much on fighting your mother and Caleb that I did not see how much the public attention would hurt you." Julian stood by the small kitchen counter, holding its edge tightly. He listened without saying a word, his jaw tight. Eleanor moved forward. Her sharp, strong attitude was gone. Her eyes looked gentle. Filled with tears, she tried not to shed. She knew how much pain she had caused her little brother. "We are very sorry, Jules," Eleanor said, her voice soft and shaky. "You didn't deserve any of this. We should have kept you safe. Instead, we let you get caught in the middle. We let you down." Julian swallowed hard and looked down at the floor. Eleanor reached inside her leather bag and took out a thick, sealed white envelope. She held it out to him. Julian paused, then slowly walked up and took the envelope from her. He carefully opened it and pulled out some clean papers. It was an official bank statement. Julian's eyes moved across the numbers. The $60,000 his mother had wrongly taken for her secret plastic surgery was now fully paid back. But as Julian looked closer, his breath caught. The money was not just paid back, it was doubled. Richard had used his own private money to make sure Julian would be secure in the future. Julian looked up at his father. The heavy weight of shame and money worries he had felt for months began to ease. Tears quietly formed in his eyes and rolled down his cheeks. He said nothing. Instead, he stepped forward and hugged his father and sister tightly, holding on to them as if he could find comfort in their closeness. Richard hugged him back just as tightly, closing his eyes. The Sterling family had been broken for a long time, but now real healing was starting. 2 hours later, the three of them sat together in a warm, softly lit Italian restaurant in downtown Seattle. The room felt calm, safe, and peaceful. They shared a bottle of expensive red wine, talking openly about the future, not about revenge. Julian took a deep breath and gently swirled the dark wine in his glass. "I want you both to know that I have started going to therapy twice a week," he said honestly. "It's helping me deal with everything that happened." "I am very proud of you for doing that," Richard said kindly. "There is something else," Julian added, sitting up a little straighter in his chair. "I am changing my last name tomorrow. I want to cut all ties with her. I don't want to keep anything connected to her family anymore." Richard nodded slowly, giving his full support. He reached across the white tablecloth. "Do whatever you need to heal and move forward, son. You have my full support. No questions asked." Julian looked right into his father's eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by quiet strength. "Dad, please sell the mountain cabin. It's not safe for our family anymore. It has become a place full of bad memories. We need a fresh, clean, new start." Richard smiled kindly and placed his large hand gently over Julian's on the table. "I already put it up for sale, Julian. It's done." The story quickly changed, moving away from the warmth of the cozy Italian restaurant. In a damp, dimly lit basement apartment in a rough part of Seattle, Victoria Sterling sat very still on an old, broken chair. The grand suburban houses, the fancy hotel spas, and the top wellness centers were gone from her life forever. Victoria no longer looked like the glamorous woman who used to sit at the best tables in the city. Her hair, once perfectly done and colored, now showed gray roots. Without the many stolen dollars needed to pay for constant medical care, her costly plastic surgery began to sag badly. Her face looked unnatural, drawn, and very old. Her eyes showed a hollow, empty look. Victoria slowly stood up from the broken chair. She reached out and took a cheap, scratchy blue janitor's uniform from a rusty hook on the wall. Slowly and without thinking, she put it on. She walked out into the cold night and went through the automatic sliding doors of a large 24-hour discount supermarket. The bright fluorescent lights buzzed loudly above her. Victoria went straight to the back storage closet without looking at anyone. She grabbed a dirty mop and a heavy yellow bucket on wheels. She started her long, hard night shift, slowly pushing the mop across the dirty floors. Late-night shoppers passed by without even glancing at her. She was completely ignored, totally alone, and unseen by the rich, high-class world she once controlled. She had given up her family for her appearance, and now she was like a ghost. The story then moved to a brightly sunny, fresh spring morning. The camera moved over the shiny, deep blue waters of Puget Sound. The sky was clear and the heavy winter storms were far behind now. Many miles away in the Cascade Mountains, an old wooden "Sold" sign gently swung in the breeze in front of the old cabin, officially closing the door on a dark past. But down by the bright water, at a large, modern new house overlooking the ocean, life was moving ahead, happily. Richard, Eleanor, and Julian walked together up the wide, sunny driveway. They carried the last small moving boxes inside their brand-new home. They walked through the bright open living room and stepped out onto the big glass balcony. The fresh, salty sea breeze gently blew through their hair. Richard stood in the middle, with his smart daughter on his right and his strong son on his left. They stood next to each other, looking at the far, clear horizon. Then they turned to each other and shared a calm, free smile. They had made it through the worst betrayal. The dark, painful past was behind them now, making space for a calm, honest, new beginning for the Sterling family. Thank you for listening to today's story. If you like this surprising tale, please subscribe to the Cheating Heart Stories channel so you don't miss our future stories. Before you leave a comment below and tell us what you think about the characters. Did you feel sorry for Julian caught in the middle? Or do you think Richard and Eleanor dealt with the betrayal in the right way? When the people closest to you betray your trust, it can be very painful. But the Sterling family's story shows that pain doesn't have to be the end. Healing begins the moment we stop hiding from the truth and start asking for it. It takes a lot of courage to leave a harmful situation and face hard realities. But doing this makes room to build a life based on real respect and honest love. Remember, you always deserve honesty. Even when starting over feels scary, it's the first step toward a peaceful and beautiful new chapter.